Should I just start whenever?
Whatever you want.
Okay. So, good evening, everyone. My name is Anjanice Newell, for those of you who don't know, and I'm going to be informing you about New Orleans voodoo. So, what do we usually think of when we hear like voodoo? We usually think of like curses or spells or like pinning of the voodoo doll, or we'll think of like cutting the chicken's head off and using the blood for like strange rituals and stuff like that. And recently in the media, there's been a lot of shows, movies such as Supernatural, American Horror Story, and a lot of us are actually exposed to it, whether you know it or not. And it's usually through media, for example, such as those. And so there's a lot of misconceptions about voodoo. And so today I'm basically going to be talking about the history. I'm also going to be talking about voodoo in media, and lastly I'm going to talk about the voodoo queen, Marie Laveau. Or any of you guys, I don't know if you know her, but she's pretty legendary. First I'm going to start off with talking about history. And according to whatisvoodoo.com, New Orleans voodoo is actually known, like there's another word for it, and it's also Louisiana voodoo, so they're the same thing. It has a lot of West African roots that basically were brought over by West African slaves. Some elements include gris, which is basically like, it's equivalent to the cross, so it's like an amulet that's usually used to protect from like evil. There's also voodoo queens, and I'll eventually talk about Marie Laveau, for example, and there's also occult paraphernalia, which basically is like, they use like jewelry as magic and stuff like that. Whoops. And there's also European, African, and Roman Catholic beliefs, which I thought was pretty interesting. I didn't know that. And now I'm going to be talking about the voodoo doll. There's kind of a myth with it. How many of you, like when you think of a voodoo doll, you think of like getting back at somebody, or like they use it for like evil purposes? Do any of you like ever like think of that? Well, before I did my research, I thought of that they were used for evil, and actually they were. Slaves used to use them to intimidate their slave owners, and but now in New Orleans, they're actually seen as like good luck charms, which I thought was pretty interesting. They're seen as like, they're very cherished in New Orleans. And so now I'm going to be talking about, so now that I talked to you about the history of voodoo with the West African roots and the voodoo doll, now I'm going to be talking about voodoo in the media. So, I forgot to say, when I was talking about the voodoo dolls, it's actually, I got my information from voodoodoll.com, which is last updated in 2015. So moving on, how many of you have seen The Princess and the Frog? Have you guys seen that movie? It's a cute movie. But so one of the voodoo is actually, and for any of you guys don't know, it takes place in New Orleans, and it's actually it's portrayed in a good light and a bad light. So like for example, in the movie, Prince Naveen, he was cursed by Dr. Facilier, and he basically was turned into a frog. And so that's the bad light. And then the good light, it's seen by the Princess Tiana. She actually reverses the curse by going back to she goes to Mama Odie, and she does her voodoo and reverses the curse, which is pretty interesting. You wouldn't even know. I also found a song. It's called Marie Laveau by Bobby Bear, and it says, down in Louisiana where the black trees grow, lives a voodoo lady named Marie Laveau. Got a black cat's tooth and a mojo bone. So I actually never knew about this song until I did my research, and I never knew that anybody would talk about voodoo in their songs. So it's pretty interesting how we're actually exposed in many, many ways. So now that I've talked about media, I'm going to move on to talk about the very legendary Marie Laveau. She was born September 10th, 1801, and she passed away June 15th, 1881. She was born to a free slave father and also a Creole mother of Louisiana. And it is believed, and this is all according to roadtripper.com, which was also last updated 2015. It is believed that her mother and her grandmother were both voodoo practitioners, and so she kind of like kept the legacy going. And in the 1860s, she practiced voodoo the most in public. And but she didn't use it for like evil purposes. She used voodoo in like medicinal ways. So she was very well known for using it for like using her herbs and using voodoo for like to heal people. And she had a child that she had many children, but only one lived past adulthood or lived to be an adult. And she, after her mother passed away, she took on the legacy, and she was known for basically like performing voodoo like in swamp areas in New Orleans. So this was basically during her lifetime. So now I'm going to talk about life after death. She's buried in St. Louis Cemetery No. 1, which is in Louisiana. And there's it's not a ritual, but a lot of people go to her tomb now, like to this day. And this is also according to roadtripper.com. And people will go and they'll leave offerings like candles, flowers, they'll leave voodoo dolls, they'll leave all kinds of stuff. And this is it. And basically people leave these like all these like cool things, and they'll leave it, and they'll go and they'll leave these offerings, and they'll like ask her for her to grant them a wish. And so when they leave, if she grants the wish, they all come back. They'll come back to her tomb, and they'll write 3 X's if the wish came true. And I don't really know. I tried to do as much research as possible to find out what the X's mean, but I couldn't find anything about them. I know one theory is like death comes in 3s, and so I don't know if that's what it means, but I found it pretty interesting that it's pretty covered up. So she's granted a lot of wishes, which is pretty interesting. So so I'm gonna wrap things up. And so basically I talked to you today about the history of voodoo, gave you a little brief background, then I talked about voodoo in media, and lastly I talked about the legendary voodoo king Marie Laveau. So I'm gonna leave you guys with a quote by the legendary rock band Metallica, and it says, "Dolls of voodoo all stuck with pins, one for each of us and our sins." Thank you.